The crowd hushed as Lydia Owens's trembling hands clutched the wooden post behind her, her honey-blonde hair falling in disarray around her tear-streaked face as Frank Chambers, the auctioneer, announced to the men gathered in the dusty town square of Sheridan, Wyoming. "Next up, gentlemen, we have Mrs. Owens here. Sold to settle her husband's gambling debts. Bidding starts at $50. April 1878 had turned cruel in Sheridan, the spring winds carrying dust that stung Lydia's eyes, though she couldn't tell if it was the dust or her tears causing the burning sensation. Just 3 days ago, she had been a respectable married woman, not property to be sold like cattle. Her husband Thomas had disappeared after losing heavily at cards to Jeremiah Quinn, the owner of the Golden Nugget Saloon. Instead of facing his creditor, Thomas had signed over the deed to their property and to Lydia herself before fleeing town. $50, called a gravelly voice from the back. Lydia recognized the voice as belonging to Wilbur Simmons, the owner of the brothel at the edge of town. Her stomach lurched. $60, called another. $75, came Simmons's voice again, more determined. Lydia closed her eyes, refusing to look at the men bidding for her future, for her body. This couldn't be happening in America in 1878, decades after emancipation. Yet here she stood, a woman being sold to settle a man's debts, a cruel reminder that freedom had its limitations, especially for a woman with no family and no means. $100, came a new voice, clear and firm. Lydia's eyes flew open, searching the crowd for the source of the bid. Near the back stood a tall man in a worn leather vest and faded blue shirt, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He was leaning against the hitching post, seemingly unconcerned with the stares now directed his way. $125, countered Simmons, irritation evident in his voice. The stranger straightened. $300. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. $300 was a small fortune in Sheridan. $300 going once, Frank announced, surprise evident in his voice. Going twice. $350, Simmons spat. $500, the stranger replied without hesitation. Simmons's face contorted with rage, but he remained silent. No one in Sheridan could outbid $500 for a woman, no matter what purpose they had in mind. $500 going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the back, Frank declared, slamming his gavel down. The crowd began to disperse, some men muttering in disappointment, others in shock at the exorbitant amount. Lydia remained frozen to the spot as the stranger approached, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. Now that he was closer, Lydia could see that he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with piercing blue eyes and a strong jawline partially obscured by several days' growth of beard. He stopped a respectful distance from her. "My name is Heath Vance," he said, his voice gentler than she expected. "I'd like to speak with you, Mrs. Owens, but not here. Would you allow me to escort you to the hotel dining room? We can talk there." Lydia hesitated. This man had just purchased her for $500. What choice did she have? Yet there was something in his eyes, something that didn't match the predatory stares of the other bidders. "I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Heath nodded once, then turned to Frank Chambers. "The paperwork," he said tersely. Frank hurriedly handed over a bill of sale which Heath signed with quick, angry strokes. He folded the paper and tucked it inside his vest before turning back to Lydia. "This way, Mrs. Owens." Heath didn't offer his arm or attempt to touch her as they walked the short distance to the Sheridan Hotel. People stared as they passed, but Heath seemed oblivious to their scrutiny. Lydia kept her gaze fixed on the wooden sidewalk, shame and confusion warring within her. The dining room was nearly empty at this hour. Heath led her to a table in the corner, far from the few occupied tables, and pulled out a chair for her. Only after she was seated did he take his own chair, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Would you care for some tea?" he asked. Lydia nodded mutely, watching as he signaled a waitress and ordered tea for her and coffee for himself. When the girl had gone, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. "Mr. Vance," Lydia finally said, finding her voice. "I don't understand what's happening. You've paid a considerable sum for me. What do you expect in return?" Heath's expression darkened. "I expect nothing from you, Mrs. Owens. What happened in that square today was an abomination. No human being should be bought or sold, regardless of what your husband promised to his creditors." The waitress returned with their drinks, and Heath waited until she had left again before continuing. "I purchased your contract to give you your freedom, not to own you." Lydia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "My freedom?" Heath reached inside his vest and pulled out the bill of sale. With deliberate movements, he tore it in half, then in quarters, continuing until it was nothing but small pieces on the table between them. "You're free to go wherever you wish, Mrs. Owens. I'll provide you with enough money to start again somewhere else if that's what you want." Tears filled Lydia's eyes again, but these were different from the tears of despair she had shed earlier. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" $500 is a fair price for doing the right thing," Heath finished for her. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've seen too much injustice in this world to stand by when I can help." "You're not from Sheridan," Lydia observed, grasping at understanding. "No, madam. I'm passing through, heading north to my ranch near the Montana border." "A rancher, then?" Heath's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Among other things, I've been many things in my 32 years." Lydia wrapped her hands around the warm teacup, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Vance." "Don't thank me yet," Heath replied, his expression becoming serious again. "You're free, but you're also alone in a town where people just watched you being auctioned off. Do you have family you can go to?" Lydia shook her head. "My parents died years ago. I have no siblings. I came west with Thomas 4 years ago after we married in Boston." Her voice caught. "I thought he loved me." "Men who love don't treat women like property," Heath said, a hardness entering his tone. "No," Lydia agreed softly. "They don't." Heath seemed to consider something for a moment, then leaned forward. "Mrs. Owens, I have a proposition for you, not a demand but an offer." Lydia tensed involuntarily, and Heath noticed. "It's not what you're thinking," he assured her quickly. "I need a housekeeper at my ranch. My previous one left to marry 2 months ago, and the place has suffered for it. It would be honest work with fair pay, and you'd have your own cabin on the property." "You're offering me employment?" "Yes, and a safe place to stay while you decide what you want to do with your life. The ranch is remote enough that you needn't worry about your husband finding you, should he return." Lydia considered the offer. She had no money, no home, and nowhere to go. The alternative was trying to find work in Sheridan, where everyone had witnessed her humiliation. "How far is your ranch?" she asked. 3 days' ride. We'd leave tomorrow morning if you agree. And I would truly be your housekeeper. Nothing more." Heath's expression remained serious. "You have my word. Your duties would be cooking, cleaning, and managing the household. Nothing more will ever be asked or expected of you." Lydia studied him, trying to discern any hint of deception in his clear blue eyes. She found none, only a quiet determination and something else, a sadness, perhaps, hidden beneath his confident exterior. "I accept your offer, Mr. Vance," she said finally. "I don't have many options, and yours seems to be the most honorable." Heath nodded. "Very well. We'll need to get you some suitable traveling clothes and supplies. Do you have any possessions you need to collect?" Lydia thought of the small house she had shared with Thomas, filled with the modest belongings they had accumulated during their marriage. "Nothing I care to keep," she said truthfully. "The house and everything in it now belong to Jeremiah Quinn." "Then we'll start fresh," Heath said, rising from his chair. "I've taken a room here for the night. I'll arrange for another for you. Tomorrow we begin our journey." As Heath went to speak with the hotel proprietor, Lydia remained at the table, her tea cooling before her. This morning, she had been a wife. By noon, she had been property to be sold. And now, as evening approached, she was a free woman with a new position and an uncertain future. All because of a stranger with kind eyes and $500 to spare. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with the promise of warmth as the sun climbed higher. Lydia had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with the jeering faces of the men at the auction. She dressed in the new clothes. Heath had purchased for her a practical riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a warm jacket, and packed the few additional items he had provided in a small carpet bag. Heath was waiting in the hotel lobby, his tall frame easy to spot among the other guests. He wore the same clothes as the day before, with the addition of a long duster and a gun belt strapped to his hips. Seeing her, he nodded once in greeting. "Did you sleep well, Mrs. Owens?" he asked, taking her carpet bag. "Well enough, thank you," she replied, though the dark circles under her eyes likely told a different story. "I've settled our accounts and prepared supplies for the journey," Heath said, leading her outside where two horses waited. One was a powerful black stallion, the other a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "This is Penny," he said, gesturing to the mare. "She's steady and reliable. Do you ride?" "Yes, though it's been some time," Lydia admitted. In Boston, she had been an accomplished horsewoman, but Thomas had discouraged such unfeminine pursuits after their marriage. "Penny will take good care of you," Heath assured her, helping her mount and adjusting her stirrups. "We'll take it slow today, give you time to get your seat back." They left Sheridan as the town was waking, the streets beginning to fill with the day's business. Lydia kept her head high, refusing to shrink under the curious stares of the townspeople. She had done nothing wrong. The shame belonged to Thomas, not to her. Once they cleared the town limits, Heath set a steady pace northward, following the clear trail that would eventually lead them into Montana territory. The spring landscape was coming alive around them, the hills dotted with early wildflowers, the creek beds running full with snowmelt. They rode mostly in silence that first morning, each lost in their own thoughts. Lydia found herself studying her benefactor when he wasn't looking. Heath Vance was a puzzle to her. He was clearly educated. His speech was that of a gentleman, despite his rough frontier appearance. The way he handled himself spoke of confidence and capability. Yet there was a gentleness in how he treated her, and the horses that intrigued her. At midday, they stopped by a stream to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky, bread, and cheese that Heath had packed. "How did you come to be in Sheridan yesterday?" Lydia asked as they sat on a fallen log, the horses grazing nearby. Heath took a drink from his canteen before answering. "I was on my way back from Cheyenne, where I'd gone to secure a bank loan for new breeding stock. I hadn't planned to stop in Sheridan at all, but my horse threw a shoe, so I had to visit the blacksmith." "Providence, then," Lydia murmured. "Perhaps," Heath agreed, "or just good timing." He glanced at her. "May I ask how you came to be in such a situation?" "You don't seem like a woman who would knowingly marry a gambler." Lydia sighed, looking out at the rolling hills. "Thomas wasn't always like that. Or perhaps he was, and I was too blind to see it. We met at a social in Boston. He was charming, handsome, from a good family." My parents had recently died and I was lonely, vulnerable. She shook her head at her own naivety. He proposed after a brief courtship and I accepted. It seemed like the answer to my prayers. And then we came west. Thomas said he wanted to make his fortune in the new territories. I believed him, but the truth was he'd gambled away his inheritance and was running from creditors in Boston. She twisted her wedding ring, which she still wore out of habit. The gambling got worse here. He would disappear for days, then return with grand promises and empty pockets. 3 days ago, he lost everything to Jeremiah Quinn, including me, apparently. Heath's jaw tightened. And he just left you to that fate. He left a note, Lydia said bitterly. Sorry, Lydia, I'll make it up to you someday, as if selling your wife is something you can make up for. It isn't, Heath said firmly. If you don't mind my saying so, Mrs. Owens, you're better off without such a man. Please call me Lydia, she said suddenly. Mrs. Owens feels wrong now. Heath studied her for a moment. Lydia then, and you should call me Heath. They continued their journey after the brief rest, the terrain gradually becoming more rugged as they traveled north. By late afternoon, Lydia was feeling the effects of the long ride, her muscles protesting after years of disuse. There's a small way station about an hour ahead, Heath informed her, noticing her discomfort. We'll stop there for the night. It's basic, but clean enough. The way station turned out to be a simple log building with a stable attached, run by a taciturn old man named Granger. For a reasonable fee, he provided them with a hot meal, stabling for their horses, and 2 small rooms partitioned off from the main area. After supper, Lydia sat by the fire, trying to ease the ache in her back and legs. Heath joined her, handing her a cup of strong coffee. It'll get easier, he said, settling into the chair opposite her. By the time we reach the ranch, you'll be riding like you never stopped. I hope so, Lydia replied with a small smile. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it despite the discomfort. They fell into a companionable silence, watching the flames dance in the stone fireplace. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the cracks in the old building. Tell me about your ranch, Lydia said finally, curious about her new home. Heath's expression softened, pride evident in his voice as he spoke. It's called the North Star, 5,000 acres of the most beautiful land you've ever seen, with the Bighorn Mountains to the west and rolling grasslands perfect for cattle. There's a good-sized main house, your cabin nearby, a bunkhouse for the hands, stables, and the usual outbuildings. It sounds lovely. How many people work there? 4 full-time hands plus extra help during calving and roundup seasons. My foreman, Charlie Wilson, has been with me since I started. He and his wife, Martha, live in a cabin on the property as well. How long have you had the ranch? Lydia asked, finding herself genuinely interested. 6 years, Heath replied. Before that, I drove cattle, rode for the Pony Express when I was younger, tried my hand at mining, even worked as a deputy marshal for a time. He smiled slightly at her surprised expression. I told you I'd been many things. Indeed you have, Lydia said, impressed by his varied experiences. What made you settle on ranching? Heath gazed into the fire, his expression growing distant. I always wanted a place of my own, somewhere permanent. My father was a wanderer. We never stayed in one place for more than a season. I promised myself I'd put down roots someday. He looked back at her. The North Star is the fulfillment of that promise. Lydia found herself wondering what other promises Heath Vance had made to himself, and whether he had fulfilled those as well. There was a depth to this man that intrigued her, despite her determination to remain detached. It's getting late, Heath said, finishing his coffee. We should rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. Lydia nodded, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. Good night, Heath, and thank you again for everything. "Good night, Lydia," he replied softly. "Sleep well." In her small, Spartan room, Lydia removed her riding clothes and slipped into the simple nightgown Heath had purchased for her. As she lay on the narrow bed, listening to the wind and the occasional creak of the old building, she reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she had been a neglected wife, worried about her husband's gambling debts. Now she was a free woman, heading toward a new life with a man she barely knew but already trusted more than the husband she'd lived with for 4 years. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, Lydia felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The next 2 days of travel followed a similar pattern. They rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only to rest the horses and take brief meals. Heath was a considerate traveling companion, setting a pace that challenged Lydia without exhausting her, sharing stories of the territories to distract her from the physical discomfort of the journey. By the 3rd day, as Heath had predicted, Lydia had regained much of her former riding ability, sitting more confidently in the saddle and even enjoying the steady rhythm of Penny's gait. The landscape had changed dramatically as they traveled north, the terrain becoming more varied, with pine-covered hills giving way to open meadows bursting with spring wildflowers. "We'll reach the North Star by early evening," Heath told her as they ate a quick lunch beside a burbling creek. "We're on my land now." Lydia looked around with renewed interest. "It's beautiful country." "Wait until you see the valley where the main house sits," Heath said, a rare smile lighting his features. "It's the most beautiful spot on the whole property." As they continued their journey, Lydia noticed subtle changes in Heath's demeanor. He sat taller in the saddle, his eyes constantly scanning the land around them, not with wariness but with evident pride and affection. This was a man who loved his home, she realized, and who took his responsibilities seriously. The sun was beginning to lower in the western sky when they crested a hill, and Heath reined his horse to a stop. Below them stretched a verdant valley, bisected by a winding stream. Nestled in the center was a large, well-built log house, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Nearby stood several smaller cabins, a bunkhouse, stables, and corrals filled with horses and cattle. In the distance, the snow-capped peaks of the Bighorn Mountains provided a majestic backdrop. "Welcome to the North Star," Heath said quietly. Lydia caught her breath at the sight. "It's even more beautiful than you described." Heath's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Let's go down. Martha will have supper waiting, and I'm sure you're eager to see your cabin and rest properly." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the main house, a stout woman in her 50s emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Behind her appeared a weathered man of similar age, his face breaking into a wide grin at the sight of them. "Heath Vance, you're 3 days late," the woman called, her tone scolding but affectionate. "Sorry, Martha," Heath replied as they reached the yard and dismounted. "I had an unexpected detour." Martha's curious gaze turned to Lydia, who suddenly felt self-conscious about her travel-worn appearance. "Martha and Charlie Wilson, I'd like you to meet Lydia Owens," Heath said, helping Lydia down from her horse. "She'll be taking over as housekeeper." If Martha and Charlie were surprised by Lydia's sudden appearance, they hid it well. Martha stepped forward, her weathered face creasing into a warm smile. "Welcome to the North Star, Mrs. Owens. We've been hoping the boss would find someone suitable. I've been trying to manage both houses since Betsy left, and these old bones aren't what they used to be." "Please call me Lydia," she replied, taking an instant liking to the motherly woman. "And I hope I'll be able to meet your expectations." "I'm sure you will," Martha assured her. "Come inside now. You must be exhausted after that long ride. I've kept supper warm and your cabin is all ready for you." The main house was even more impressive inside than out. The large central room had a soaring ceiling with exposed beams, a massive stone fireplace, and comfortable, if somewhat masculine, furnishings. Bookcases lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes that suggested Heath was a more scholarly man than his appearance might indicate. After a hearty supper of venison stew and freshly baked bread, during which Charlie regaled them with ranch news, Heath escorted Lydia to her cabin. It was a short walk from the main house, a neat log structure with a small porch and window boxes waiting for spring flowers. "It's not fancy," Heath said, lighting the lamp just inside the door, "but I hope you'll be comfortable here." Lydia stepped inside, pleasantly surprised by what she found. The cabin consisted of a main room with a small cooking area, a table and chairs, a comfortable-looking rocking chair by the stone fireplace, and a separate bedroom visible through an open doorway. Everything was clean and well-maintained, with touches that spoke of Martha's thoughtfulness: fresh wildflowers on the table, a colorful quilt on the bed, curtains at the windows. "It's lovely," Lydia said sincerely. "Far nicer than I expected." Heath nodded, seemingly pleased by her reaction. "Martha's stocked the pantry with basic supplies. I'll have one of the hands bring your bathwater shortly. I imagine you're eager to wash away 3 days of trail dust." "Very eager," Lydia admitted with a small laugh. Heath lingered in the doorway, appearing uncharacteristically uncertain. "We can discuss your duties tomorrow after you've rested. There's no hurry. Take as much time as you need to settle in." "Thank you, Heath, for everything." He nodded once, his eyes meeting hers briefly before he looked away. "Good night, Lydia." After he'd gone, Lydia explored her new home more thoroughly. The cabin was simple but well crafted, with thoughtful details that made it feel homey rather than austere. The bedroom contained a surprisingly comfortable-looking bed, a chest of drawers, and a small dressing table with a mirror. In the main room, she discovered a bookshelf with several volumes, some practical guides to household management, but also novels by Dickens and Austen. True to Heath's word, 2 ranch hands arrived shortly with buckets of heated water for the copper tub that stood in a curtained corner of the bedroom. Lydia thanked them, then luxuriated in the first proper bath she'd had in days, washing her hair and scrubbing away the dust and weariness of the journey. Afterward, wrapped in a clean nightgown that Martha had thoughtfully left for her, Lydia sat in the rocking chair by the fire, combing out her damp hair and reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. A week ago, she had been a neglected wife in a loveless marriage. Now she was a housekeeper on a beautiful ranch, employed by a man who had spent a small fortune to give her freedom. The question that had been nagging at her since that moment in the Sheridan town square returned. Why had Heath Vance done it? He said he couldn't stand by in the face of injustice, but $500 was an extraordinary sum to spend on a principal. There had to be more to the story. As the fire crackled and the night sounds of the ranch drifted through the partially open window, Lydia resolved to learn more about the enigmatic rancher who had rescued her. But for now, exhaustion claimed her, and she made her way to the bed, falling into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. The following morning, Lydia woke to sunshine streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life: horses nickering, men calling to each other, the clang of tools from what must be the blacksmith shop. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory flooded back, and with it came a strange mixture of anxiety and excitement about the day ahead. She dressed in one of the simple but well-made dresses Heath had purchased for her in Sheridan, arranged her hair in a practical knot at the nape of her neck, and stepped outside onto her small porch. The morning was glorious. The valley bathed in golden light, the snow-capped mountains in the distance gleaming against the blue sky. Taking a deep breath of the clean, pine-scented air, Lydia felt more alive than she had in years. As she made her way toward the main house, she took the opportunity to observe the ranch in daylight. It was an impressive operation, clearly well managed and prosperous. Cowboys moved purposefully between buildings, cattle grazed in nearby pastures, and a sense of orderly industry pervaded the place. Martha was in the main house kitchen, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. She looked up as Lydia entered, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in ages," Lydia admitted. "The cabin is perfect, Martha. Thank you for making it so welcoming." "It was my pleasure," Martha replied, dusting flour from her hands. "Now have some breakfast and then I'll show you around the house." "The boss is already out with the men, checking on the new calves. He said to tell you he'll be back for the midday meal." After a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits, Martha gave Lydia a comprehensive tour of the main house. It was larger than it appeared from outside, with a spacious kitchen, dining room, sitting room, library, and Heath's study on the main floor, plus 4 bedrooms upstairs. "It's a big house for one man," Lydia observed as they finished the tour in the library. Martha nodded, a knowing look in her eye. "Heath built it with a family in mind, though he's never said as much. There was a young lady once, about 4 years ago, but it didn't work out." Lydia's curiosity was piqued, but she resisted the urge to press for details. It wasn't her place to pry into Heath's personal life, no matter how intriguing she found him. "Now, about your duties," Martha continued, moving briskly past the subject. "Heath expects the main house to be kept clean, meals prepared, laundry done, and the like. He takes most of his meals here, though sometimes he'll eat with the men in the bunkhouse. He likes simple, hearty food, nothing fancy. The house accounts are kept in the study. You'll need to balance them each month and provide a report." It sounded like standard housekeeper responsibilities, nothing Lydia couldn't handle. She had managed a household in Boston before her marriage, though on a smaller scale. "What about entertaining?" she asked. "Does Heath have many visitors?" "Some," Martha replied. "Business associates occasionally, the neighboring ranchers now and then. He's not one for socializing much, but he knows the value of maintaining good relations. When guests do come, they expect a proper meal and comfortable accommodations." By the time Heath returned for the midday meal, Lydia had familiarized herself with the kitchen and prepared a simple but satisfying lunch of cold ham, fresh bread, cheese, and apple pie that Martha had baked the previous day. Heath arrived with Charlie, both men dusty from the morning's work but in good spirits. The Hereford heifer had twin calves, Charlie announced as they washed up at the pump outside the kitchen door. "Both healthy as can be." "That's the 3rd set of twins this season," Heath added, drying his hands on the towel Lydia offered him. "Unusual but welcome." Lunch was a pleasant affair, with conversation flowing easily around the table. Lydia found herself relaxing in the informal atmosphere, so different from the strained meals she'd endured with Thomas, when she'd constantly feared saying the wrong thing and triggering his anger or derision. After the meal, Heath asked Lydia to join him in his study. It was a handsome room, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive oak desk. Maps of the territory hung on one wall, while the opposite wall featured a stone fireplace flanked by comfortable leather chairs. "Please, sit down," Heath said, gesturing to one of the chairs while taking the other. "I want to make sure you're settling in all right and address any concerns you might have." "I'm settling in very well, thank you," Lydia assured him. Martha has been extremely helpful and the cabin is far more comfortable than I expected." "Good," Heath nodded, seeming genuinely pleased. "Martha mentioned your duties to you." "Yes, and they all seem reasonable and well within my capabilities." "Excellent. As for your compensation, I'll pay you $30 a month plus room and board. Is that acceptable?" Lydia tried not to show her surprise. $30 was a generous salary for a housekeeper, particularly with lodging provided. "More than acceptable," she replied. "Thank you. You'll have Sundays off, of course, and any other time you need within reason. Just let me know in advance." Heath paused, studying her for a moment. "There's one more thing. I want you to feel safe here, Lydia. If your husband should ever find you, I doubt he will," Lydia interjected. "Thomas was running from his debts. He's likely halfway to California by now." "Nevertheless," Heath continued, "if he should appear or if you ever feel unsafe for any reason, I want you to come to me immediately. Day or night. Is that clear?" His concern touched her. "Yes, that's clear, thank you." Heath seemed satisfied. "Good. Now, I imagine you'll want to take inventory of the pantry and make a list of any supplies you need. We make a trip to town every 2 weeks for provisions." As Lydia left the study, she found herself wondering again about the man who was now her employer. Heath Vance was clearly educated and cultured, yet he had chosen the rugged life of a rancher. He was kind and considerate, yet there was an underlying strength, even a hardness that suggested he could be formidable when circumstances required. And why was a man like Heath, successful and handsome, living alone in a house built for a family? These questions occupied Lydia's mind as she went about her new duties, familiarizing herself with the pantry contents and making detailed lists of what would be needed for the coming weeks. By the time evening fell, she had a solid understanding of the household routine and had already begun to plan improvements to make the house more efficient and comfortable. Supper that night was a simple affair, with just Heath at the table, as Martha and Charlie had returned to their own cabin. Lydia served a meal of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans, followed by apple cobbler. "This is excellent," Heath commented as he savored the dessert. "You're a fine cook, Lydia." "Thank you," she replied, pleased by the compliment. "I've always enjoyed cooking, though Thomas preferred dining in restaurants when we could afford it." Heath's expression darkened slightly at the mention of her husband. "His loss," he said shortly. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments before Heath spoke again. "I noticed you were looking at the books in the library earlier. Do you enjoy reading?" Lydia nodded, her face brightening. "Very much. My father was a professor of literature at Harvard, so I grew up surrounded by books. Reading has always been my greatest pleasure." "Mine as well," Heath admitted with a small smile. "My mother taught me to read when I was very young, and I've never stopped. Feel free to borrow anything that interests you from the library or my study." "Thank you, I'd like that," Lydia replied, warmed by this unexpected connection between them. After supper, Heath excused himself to review some ranch accounts, and Lydia returned to her cabin. As she prepared for bed, she realized that for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The North Star was already beginning to feel like home, and the work, though demanding, was satisfying. As for Heath Vance, well, he was becoming more intriguing with each conversation. The days settled into a pleasant routine. Lydia rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for Heath and any ranch hands who might be joining him. After the morning meal, she would clean the main house, do laundry, bake bread, or perform whatever other household tasks needed attention. In the afternoons, she often worked in the kitchen garden Martha had started, tending to the vegetables and herbs that would supply the house through the summer and fall. Heath was often away from the house during the day, riding out with the men to check on the herds, repair fences, or handle the myriad other tasks required to run a successful ranch. But he was invariably present for the evening meal, and those quiet suppers became the highlight of Lydia's day. During those meals, they would discuss books they had read, share stories of their respective childhoods, or talk about current events based on the newspapers and journals that arrived with the monthly mail delivery. Heath proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist with wide-ranging interests, and Lydia found herself opening up to him in a way she never had with Thomas. One evening about 3 weeks after her arrival, as they lingered over coffee and apple pie, Heath broached a subject they had thus far avoided. "You never talk about your marriage," he observed quietly. "I hope you don't think I'm prying, but I've wondered if there was more to the story than what you've told me." Lydia's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "There is," she admitted after a moment. "Thomas wasn't just a gambler. He was cruel in ways that weren't always visible to others." Heath's expression darkened. "Did he hurt you physically?" "Sometimes," Lydia said softly. "But more often it was the emotional cruelty that left deeper scars. He would belittle me, undermine my confidence, isolate me from anyone who might have been a friend. By the end, I barely recognized myself. The confident, educated young woman I had been seemed like a distant memory. And yet that woman still exists," Heath said, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I see her emerging more each day." Lydia felt a warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you for saying that. I feel as though I'm rediscovering parts of myself that I thought were lost forever." "Good," Heath said firmly, "because that woman, the real Lydia, is worth knowing." The conversation left Lydia with much to think about as she walked back to her cabin under a star-filled sky. Heath's perception surprised her. Few people in her life had ever truly seen her, looked beyond the surface to the person within. Thomas certainly never had. But Heath seemed to recognize qualities in her that she had forgotten she possessed. And if she was being honest with herself, she was beginning to see qualities in Heath that attracted her: his quiet strength, his integrity, his unexpected gentleness. But she quickly pushed such thoughts aside. He was her employer, her benefactor. Whatever growing fondness she felt for him must remain firmly in check. The following Sunday, with the weather particularly fine, Lydia decided to use her day off to explore the ranch beyond the immediate vicinity of the main house. After attending the informal church service that Martha organized in the bunkhouse for those workers who wished to participate, Lydia packed a simple lunch and set off on Penny, whom Heath had told her she was welcome to ride whenever she liked. She followed a well-worn trail that led along the creek, delighting in the wildflowers that carpeted the meadows and the occasional glimpse of wildlife: deer drinking at the water's edge, a red-tailed hawk soaring overhead. After about an hour's ride, she came to a small, pristine lake nestled in a grove of aspens. The setting was so picturesque that Lydia immediately dismounted, securing Penny to a nearby tree and settling on a fallen log to enjoy her lunch. She was halfway through her meal when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. Heath appeared through the trees, mounted on his black stallion. He reined in when he saw her, surprise evident on his face. "Lydia," he said, dismounting and leading his horse over to where she sat. "I didn't expect to find anyone here." "I'm sorry if I'm intruding," she replied, suddenly concerned that she might have wandered somewhere she shouldn't have. "I was just exploring on my day off." "No apology needed," Heath assured her, securing his horse beside Penny. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch. I often come here when I need to think." "May I join you?" "Of course," Lydia said, making room on the log. "Would you like to share my lunch? I have plenty." Heath accepted with thanks, and they sat side by side, eating in companionable silence for a few minutes while gazing out at the tranquil lake. "I can see why you love this spot," Lydia said finally. "It's beautiful and so peaceful." Heath nodded, his expression softening as he looked out over the water. "When I first saw this lake, I knew I wanted to build the ranch here. It reminded me of a place my mother used to take me when I was a boy, a hidden lake in the woods near our cabin in Kentucky." "You've never really spoken about your family," Lydia observed. Heath was quiet for a moment, and Lydia thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and reflective. "My mother was extraordinarily strong, intelligent, loving. She taught school before she married my father, and she made sure I received a proper education despite our frequent moves. My father was a different sort of man, restless, always searching for the next opportunity, the next adventure. He wasn't cruel, but he was absent more often than not, leaving my mother and me to fend for ourselves." "That must have been difficult," Lydia said softly. "It was," Heath acknowledged. "Especially for my mother. She deserved better than the life he gave her, constantly uprooting her, making promises he never kept. But she loved him until the day she died." "And when was that?" Lydia asked gently. 15 years ago. I was 17. Influenza took her during a particularly harsh winter in Colorado." His voice grew rougher with emotion. "My father lasted less than a year after that. It was as if without her strength to sustain him, he simply lost the will to go on. He died in a mining accident in Nevada." "I'm sorry, Heath," Lydia said, instinctively placing her hand on his arm. He covered her hand with his own, the contact sending a warm current through her. "Thank you. It was a long time ago, but I think of them often, especially my mother. She would have loved this place." They sat in silence for a few minutes, their hands still touching before Heath spoke again. "What about your family? You mentioned your father was a professor. What was your home life like?" Lydia smiled at the memories. "It was wonderful. Our house was always filled with books and ideas and passionate discussions. My father believed in educating women to the same standard as men, which was rather progressive for his time. My mother was his equal partner in every way. She'd studied mathematics and often assisted with his research. No siblings. No, I was their only child. They were older when they had me. My mother was nearly 40. They had almost given up hope of having children." Her smile turned wistful. "They would have been devastated to see how my life turned out with Thomas. But proud of how you're rebuilding it now," Heath said firmly. "Don't forget that part." Lydia met his gaze, touched by his confidence in her. For a long moment they looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Heath cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. "We should head back," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "There's a storm brewing to the west, and we don't want to get caught in it." As they rode back to the ranch, side by side this time, Lydia reflected on their conversation. Heath had opened up to her in a way that suggested trust and growing friendship. And if her heart had quickened when their hands touched, if she found herself stealing glances at his profile as they rode well, that was something to examine later, in the privacy of her own thoughts. The storm Heath had predicted arrived just as they reached the ranch, sending everyone scurrying for shelter as the first fat raindrops fell. By evening, it had developed into a full-blown spring thunderstorm, with lightning illuminating the valley in brief, brilliant flashes and thunder rolling across the mountains. Lydia served a simple supper in the kitchen rather than the dining room, as the main house felt cozier with the hearth fire blazing against the storm's fury. Heath seemed preoccupied during the meal, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Is everything all right?" Lydia ventured after they had eaten in silence for several minutes. Heath looked up, seeming to come back from some distant contemplation. Yes, I'm sorry. I was thinking about the new foals in the north pasture. This is a heavy storm and they're still young. I hope Charlie remembered to bring them and their mothers into the shelter. I'm sure he did, Lydia assured him. He's very conscientious. Heath nodded, but his concern remained evident. When a particularly violent crash of thunder shook the house, he stood abruptly. I need to check on them. It won't take long, but I won't rest easy until I know they're safe. Of course, Lydia said, understanding his sense of responsibility. Be careful out there. Heath donned his slicker and hat, then hesitated at the door. Wait up for me, he asked, something in his tone making the simple request seem more significant. Lydia nodded. I'll keep the coffee hot. The storm intensified after Heath left, the wind howling around the eaves of the house, rain lashing against the windows in sheets. Lydia busied herself with cleaning the kitchen, then settled in the sitting room with a book, though she found it difficult to concentrate with the storm raging outside and Heath out in it. An hour passed, then another. Concern began to gnaw at Lydia. Surely checking on the foals shouldn't take this long, even in such weather. She was about to go wake Charlie when the front door burst open and Heath staggered in, supporting another man whose face was a mask of blood. Lydia, quick, Heath called, his voice urgent. Help me get him to the sofa. It's Jeb Miller from the Circle M. His wagon overturned in the storm not far from our north boundary. Lydia rushed to assist, helping Heath lower the injured man onto the sofa. Jeb was semi-conscious, moaning in pain. Besides the head wound, his right leg was bent at an unnatural angle. I need to get Martha and Charlie, Heath said, already moving toward the door. She's good with injuries. Can you stay with him? Try to stop the bleeding on his head. Of course, Lydia replied, already tearing a clean cloth into bandages. Go quickly. As Heath disappeared back into the storm, Lydia turned her attention to the injured man. She had some experience with first aid, having assisted the doctor in Sheridan a few times when extra hands were needed. Carefully, she cleaned the head wound, which looked worse than it was. Scalp wounds always bled profusely. The leg was more concerning. It was clearly broken, possibly in multiple places. Heath returned with Martha and Charlie, all of them drenched despite their rain gear. Martha immediately took charge, directing Charlie to fetch her medical supplies and Heath to boil water and prepare clean linens. Lydia assisted as best she could, holding Jeb still when necessary and passing Martha the items she requested. It was well past midnight before they had Jeb stabilized. Martha had set the broken leg as best she could with splints, cleaned and bandaged the head wound, and administered laudanum for the pain. Jeb was now sleeping fitfully on the sofa, covered with blankets against the chill that lingered despite the fire. He'll need a proper doctor, Martha said, washing blood from her hands in a basin of warm water. But he'll survive until morning. Charlie will ride to town at first light to fetch Dr. Porter. Thank you, Martha, Heath said, his exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. You and Charlie should get some rest now. Lydia and I will keep watch over Jeb. After the Wilsons had gone, Heath collapsed into an armchair near the sofa, running a hand through his damp hair. Lydia brought him a cup of hot coffee, which he accepted with a grateful nod. You were amazing tonight, he said as she settled in a chair opposite him. Not everyone can remain so calm in a crisis. Martha did the real work, Lydia demurred. I merely assisted. Still, Heath insisted, you didn't hesitate or falter, that's rare. Lydia smiled slightly. My mother always said a level head in an emergency was the most useful trait a person could possess. She volunteered at the hospital in Boston during the war, so she had some experience with such matters. Heath studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. Your parents raised a remarkable woman, he said quietly. The simple compliment warmed Lydia more than the fire or the coffee. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. They fell into a companionable silence, broken only by the occasional moan from Jeb or the dying crackle of the fire. Outside, the storm had abated somewhat, the thunder now distant rumbles rather than earth-shaking crashes. "I found the foals, by the way," Heath said after a while. "All safe in the shelter with their mothers, just as you predicted. I was on my way back when I heard Jeb calling for help." "Providence again," Lydia murmured. "Perhaps," Heath agreed, "or just good timing." The phrase echoed what he had said in the Sheridan Hotel dining room, the day he had torn up her bill of sale and offered her freedom. The memory brought a rush of gratitude that she had met this man, that fate or providence, or whatever one chose to call it, had placed her in his path. As the night wore on, they took turns dozing in their chairs, one always remaining awake to monitor Jeb's condition. In the gray hours before dawn, Lydia woke from a light sleep to find Heath watching her, his expression unguarded in a way she had never seen before. There was tenderness there, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. Before she could analyze it further, Jeb stirred, groaning in pain, and the moment was lost as they both turned their attention to their patient. Charlie rode out at first light to fetch the doctor from the nearest town, some 20 miles away. Heath sent one of the ranch hands to the Circle M to inform them of Jeb's accident and whereabouts. By mid-morning, Jeb was more coherent, able to thank them for their aid and explain what had happened. "Storm spooked my horses," he said, wincing as Martha changed the dressing on his head. "Wagon went over into a gully. Last thing I remember is trying to climb out. Don't know how I made it to the road." "You're lucky Heath found you when he did," Martha told him. "Much longer in that rain and you might not have made it." Jeb nodded weakly. "Grateful to you all." The doctor arrived shortly after noon, a gruff but competent man named Porter who confirmed Martha's assessment. The leg was broken in 2 places and would need time to heal, but with proper care, Jeb should make a full recovery. The head wound was superficial, though the concussion required monitoring for a few days. "He shouldn't be moved for at least a week," Dr. Porter advised Heath. "After that, if he's stable, he can be transported home in a wagon, but he'll need to stay off that leg for at least 6 weeks." Heath assured the doctor that Jeb was welcome to remain at the North Star as long as necessary. "We have plenty of room, and Mrs. Owens and Martha will ensure he's well cared for." By evening, representatives from the Circle M had arrived, including the ranch owner, Douglas Mitchell, and his daughter, Sarah. Mr. Mitchell was profuse in his thanks, insisting on paying for Jeb's care and the doctor's services. "Nonsense," Heath replied firmly. "Jeb is our guest, and we're happy to help. Any of my men would receive the same hospitality at the Circle M, I'm sure." As the 2 ranchers discussed arrangements, Lydia found herself talking with Sarah Mitchell, a pretty, dark-haired young woman of about 20. Sarah was clearly intelligent and well-educated, having recently returned from schooling in Denver. "Father says you're new to the North Star," Sarah commented as they prepared a tray to take to Jeb. "How do you like it so far?" "Very much," Lydia replied honestly. "It's a beautiful place, and everyone has been welcoming." "Heath is lucky to have found a housekeeper of your caliber," Sarah said, a speculative gleam in her eye as she glanced toward where Heath stood talking with her father. "He's quite the catch, you know. Half the unmarried women in the territory have set their caps for him, but he's never shown particular interest in any of them. Well, except for Julia Harrington a few years back, but that ended badly." Lydia felt a strange twinge at this information, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "Oh, what happened, if you don't mind my asking?" Sarah leaned closer, clearly enjoying sharing the gossip. She jilted him for a banker from Cheyenne. Broke his heart, according to local talk. He hasn't courted anyone seriously since. I see, Lydia murmured, finding herself unexpectedly bothered by the thought of Heath heartbroken over another woman. Which was ridiculous, she told herself firmly. Heath's past romances were none of her concern. Sarah seemed about to say more when her father called her, indicating they were ready to leave. As the Mitchell party departed, with promises to return the following day to check on Jeb, Lydia found herself watching Heath closely. Had his heart truly been broken by this Julia? Is that why he lived alone in a house built for a family? The days that followed were busy ones. In addition to her regular duties, Lydia now had an invalid to care for. Jeb proved to be a good-natured patient, grateful for the care and eager to return to his own ranch, though Dr. Porter, who visited every few days, continued to caution against moving him too soon. Heath was often away during this period, riding the boundaries of his property and meeting with neighboring ranchers about water rights and grazing territories. When he was home, he spent time with Jeb, playing cards or simply talking, and Lydia noticed how naturally kind he was with the injured man, never making him feel like a burden. Their evening conversations continued, though often with Jeb as a third participant, which changed the dynamic somewhat. Lydia found herself missing the more personal exchanges she and Heath had shared before Jeb's arrival. One evening, about a week after the accident, Heath sought her out in the kitchen after Jeb had fallen asleep. "You've been working too hard," he said, leaning against the doorframe as she kneaded bread dough for the next day's breakfast. "Looking after Jeb on top of your regular duties is too much." "I don't mind," Lydia assured him, pushing a strand of hair back with her wrist, leaving a smudge of flour on her cheek. "He's a good patient, and Martha helps a great deal." Heath crossed the room and, before she realized his intention, gently brushed the flour from her face with his thumb. The simple touch sent a jolt of awareness through her, and she found herself holding her breath as his hand lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Nevertheless," Heath said, his voice lower than usual, "you deserve an evening off. Tomorrow night I'd like you to join me for supper in town. There's a new restaurant at the hotel that I've been meaning to try. Martha can watch over Jeb for a few hours." It wasn't quite a request, but neither was it a command. There was a question in his eyes, a hint of uncertainty that touched Lydia deeply. This confident, capable man was asking, not telling. "I'd like that," she replied softly. Heath's smile transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes and making him look younger. "Good. We'll leave around 4 if that suits you." After he'd gone, Lydia found herself humming as she finished the bread dough. It wasn't a courtship, she told herself firmly. Just an employer showing appreciation to a hard-working employee. But a small, hopeful part of her wondered if perhaps it might be something more. The next day passed in a flurry of activity as Lydia completed her chores and prepared for the evening out. She washed her hair and arranged it more carefully than usual, securing it with her mother's pearl combs, one of the few possessions she had brought with her from Sheridan. The blue dress she chose was simple but flattering, emphasizing her slim waist and bringing out the color of her eyes. Heath was waiting for her at the appointed time, looking handsome in a clean shirt, vest, and his best trousers. His expression as she descended the stairs told Lydia that her efforts had not been in vain. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, accepting his arm as they walked to the waiting buggy. The town nearest to the North Star was called Pine Ridge, a growing settlement that served as a commercial center for the surrounding ranches and farms. It was smaller than Sheridan but prosperous, with a main street lined with businesses, a church, a schoolhouse, and the two-story hotel that housed the new restaurant. As they entered the hotel dining room, Lydia was aware of curious glances from the other diners. Clearly, Heath Vance dining with a woman was noteworthy enough to attract attention. "Don't mind them," Heath murmured as he held her chair. "Small towns run on gossip, and we've just provided them with at least a week's worth." The meal was excellent, the best food Lydia had tasted since leaving Boston. They talked easily throughout the courses, discussing books they had both read, sharing observations about the townspeople, and laughing over Jeb's colorful stories of his adventures as a young cowboy. It was during dessert, a delicious apple tart with vanilla cream, that Heath brought up a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "Lydia, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you," he began, his expression suddenly serious. "You've been at the North Star for nearly a month now, and in that time, you've proven yourself to be not just an excellent housekeeper, but a woman of remarkable character and intelligence." Lydia felt a flutter of anticipation, though she wasn't sure what was coming. "Thank you, Heath. I've been very happy at the ranch." "I'm glad to hear that," he said, meeting her gaze directly, "because I'd like to propose a change to our arrangement." Her heart skipped a beat. "What kind of change?" "I'd like to offer you a partnership of sorts. The ranch is growing, and so are my business interests in town. I could use someone with your education and organizational skills to help manage the accounts, correspondence, and other administrative matters. It would be in addition to your current duties, with appropriate compensation, of course." It wasn't what Lydia had been expecting or perhaps hoping for, if she was honest with herself. But it was a generous offer, one that recognized her capabilities beyond simple housekeeping. "I'm flattered by your confidence in me," she said carefully. "But I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're proposing. Would I still be your housekeeper?" Heath leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Yes, but with expanded responsibilities and authority. You would essentially be running the household and business affairs of the ranch, reporting directly to me. Your salary would increase to $50 a month, and you would have a greater say in how things are managed." It was an extraordinary offer, one that would give her financial independence and meaningful work beyond domestic duties. Yet Lydia couldn't help feeling a twinge of disappointment that it was purely a business arrangement. "I would be honored to accept," she said finally. "Thank you for your trust in me." Heath smiled, though Lydia thought she detected a hint of something else in his expression, relief perhaps, or possibly disappointment of his own. But that made no sense. "Excellent," he said, raising his coffee cup in a small toast, "to our new partnership." They clinked cups, and Lydia tried to suppress the irrational wish that he had been proposing a different kind of partnership altogether. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey into town, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The night was clear, with a full moon illuminating the landscape in silver light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. As they approached the ranch, Heath suddenly reined in the horses, bringing the buggy to a stop on a rise overlooking the valley. Below them, the buildings of the North Star were visible, windows glowing with warm lamplight. "I never tire of this view," Heath said, gazing down at his domain. "Every time I see it, I feel grateful for what I've built here." "It's beautiful," Lydia agreed, turning to look at him. In the moonlight, his profile was strong and clear, his expression reflective. "Do you ever regret coming here?" he asked, still looking out at the valley. "No," Lydia replied without hesitation. "Not for a moment. Even if I had a choice, I would choose the North Star." Heath turned to her then, his eyes searching hers. "And if you had a choice now, if you could go anywhere, do anything?" "I would still choose to be here," she said softly. "This place has become home to me in a way nowhere else ever has." Something shifted in Heath's expression, a softening that made Lydia's heart beat faster. He moved closer on the buggy seat, his gaze never leaving hers. "Lydia," he said, his voice low and intense, "I've been fighting this feeling since the day I found you in Sheridan, but I can't fight it anymore. I care for you deeply. More than I should as your employer. More than I thought possible after what happened before." Lydia's breath caught in her throat. "Heath, you don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I know it's too soon, that you're still healing from your marriage, and I would never want you to feel obligated or pressured because of our circumstances. But I needed you to know how I feel, even if you can't feel the same way." "But I do," Lydia whispered, finding her courage. "I care for you too, Heath, so much that it frightens me sometimes." The naked hope that dawned in his eyes was beautiful to behold. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Heath raised his hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "May I kiss you, Lydia Owens?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that was tender at first, then deepening as Heath's arm circled her waist, drawing her closer. Lydia felt as though something long frozen within her was finally thawing, blooming under the warmth of this man's touch. When they finally parted, Heath rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "So have I," Lydia confessed, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They stayed like that for a long moment, the night quiet around them, the moon bathing them in its silver light. Then Heath straightened, taking her hands in his. "I want to court you properly, Lydia," he said earnestly. "Not as my housekeeper or business partner, but as the woman I'm coming to love, if you'll allow it." Love. The word hung in the air between them, charged with promise and possibility. "Yes," Lydia replied, her heart full to bursting. "I would like that very much." Heath's smile was radiant as he gathered her close for another kiss. This one sealed with the promise of a future together, a future neither of them could have imagined a month earlier, when fate had brought them together in the dusty town square of Sheridan. The following weeks brought changes to the North Star that reflected the shifting relationship between Heath and Lydia. While she continued her duties as housekeeper and took on the additional responsibilities Heath had outlined, there was a new dimension to their interactions, a tenderness, a growing intimacy that was evident to everyone on the ranch. Heath began courting her in earnest, with small but meaningful gestures. Wildflowers appeared on her breakfast tray. Books he thought she might enjoy were left on her doorstep. On Sundays, they would ride together to their special spot by the lake, where they would talk for hours or simply sit in companionable silence, enjoying each other's presence. In the evenings, after supper was cleared away, they would often sit in the library, Heath reading aloud from poetry collections or novels while Lydia worked on mending or simply listened, captivated by the rich timbre of his voice. Sometimes their hands would meet, fingers intertwining in a simple touch that conveyed volumes. Jeb Miller, still recovering at the ranch but now able to move about on crutches, observed these developments with amused interest. "Never thought I'd see the day," he commented to Lydia one afternoon as she changed the dressing on his healing leg. Heath Vance, smitten as a schoolboy, and with the prettiest lady in the territory at that. Lydia blushed, though she couldn't help being pleased. "Is it that obvious?" "To anyone with eyes," Jeb confirmed with a chuckle. "The way he looks at you when you're not watching would melt snow in January." Such observations made Lydia both happy and somewhat anxious. Her feelings for Heath were growing stronger by the day, developing into something she recognized as love. But doubts still lingered. She was, technically, still a married woman. Thomas had abandoned her, true, but in the eyes of the law they remained husband and wife. And what if he should return? The thought haunted her occasionally, a shadow on her growing happiness. Heath seemed to sense her concerns, though she never voiced them directly. One evening, as they sat together on the porch swing after supper, watching the sun set behind the mountains, he broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "I've been thinking about your situation, Lydia," he said, his arm resting comfortably around her shoulders. "About Thomas." Lydia tensed slightly. "What about him? If he never returns, you could eventually file for divorce on grounds of abandonment," Heath said carefully. "But it would take time, years in some jurisdictions." "And if he does return?" Lydia asked, voicing her deepest fear. Heath's arm tightened around her protectively. "Then we would face that together. But I've been making inquiries discreetly through a lawyer friend in Cheyenne. There might be another solution." Lydia turned to look at him, curious. "What kind of solution?" "The bill of sale," Heath explained. "The one I tore up. It was witnessed and legal, however repugnant. My friend believes that Thomas effectively surrendered his marital rights when he signed that document. In the eyes of the law, your marriage might already be dissolved." Hope flared in Lydia's heart. "Is that possible?" "It's a legal gray area," Heath admitted, "but worth pursuing. My friend is researching similar cases. It might take some time, but there's reason for optimism." Lydia leaned her head against his shoulder, relief washing through her. "Thank you for doing this, Heath. For trying to find a way forward for us." "Us," Heath repeated, the word laden with meaning. "I like the sound of that." As spring gave way to early summer, life on the ranch grew busier. The cattle drives began, taking herds to market or to summer grazing lands higher in the mountains. Heath was often away for days at a time, leaving Lydia to manage the household and, increasingly, the business affairs of the North Star. She discovered that she had a talent for administration, keeping the accounts in perfect order and handling correspondence with suppliers, buyers, and Heath's business associates with skill and efficiency. Heath's trust in her abilities gave her a confidence she hadn't felt in years, reinforcing her sense of self-worth that Thomas had worked so hard to undermine. June brought news from Heath's lawyer friend in Cheyenne. He had found a precedent for their situation, a case from Missouri where a court had ruled that a husband who sold his wife had effectively terminated the marriage contract. While not a definitive solution, it offered a path forward that could potentially be pursued in Wyoming's courts. "It's encouraging," Heath told Lydia as they discussed the letter one evening in his study. "Not a guarantee, but a strong possibility." "And if it doesn't work?" Lydia asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind. Heath took her hands in his expression serious. "Then we wait. However long it takes, Lydia. What I feel for you isn't going to change." It was the closest he had come to declaring his love directly, though Lydia could read it in his eyes, in the tender way he touched her, in the thousand small gestures that made up their daily interactions. "Nor will my feelings for you," she assured him, squeezing his hands. The warmth in Heath's eyes deepened, and he leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss that began gently but quickly kindled into something more passionate, reflecting the growing intensity of their feelings for each other. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster, and Heath's eyes had darkened with desire. "I should go," Lydia said reluctantly, knowing that if she stayed, their emotions might carry them further than was wise, given their uncertain status. Heath nodded, visibly struggling for control. "Yes, you should. But know this, Lydia Owens, when the time is right, when there are no more legal barriers between us, I intend to ask you a very important question." Lydia's heart leaped at the implication. "And I look forward to answering it," she replied softly before slipping from the study. Late June brought an unexpected visitor to the North Star. Lydia was in the kitchen, preparing preserves from the early summer berries, when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Wiping her hands on her apron, she stepped onto the porch to see who had arrived. A dusty buckboard had pulled up in front of the main house, driven by a man she didn't recognize. As she watched, he helped a woman down from the seat, a woman in an expensive-looking traveling suit whose dark hair was arranged in an elegant coiffure. "Can I help you?" Lydia called, descending the steps to greet the visitors. The woman turned, and Lydia was struck by her beauty classic features, porcelain skin, and eyes of a striking green. She assessed Lydia with a cool gaze before speaking. "I'm looking for Heath Vance," she said, her accent marking her as Eastern educated. "Is he available?" "Mr. Vance is out with the herd today," Lydia replied, wondering who this elegant stranger might be. "He's expected back by supper time. May I tell him who called?" The woman's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Julia Harrington," she said, as if the name should mean something to Lydia. "And you are—" Lydia felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Julia Harrington, the woman who had broken Heath's heart, according to Sarah Mitchell." "What was she doing here?" "Lydia Owens," she managed to reply, keeping her voice steady. "I'm the housekeeper, and Mr. Vance's business partner," she added, feeling a strange need to establish her position. Something flashed in Julia's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or calculation. "I see. Well, Mrs. Owens, I've come a long way to speak with Heath. Would it be possible to wait for his return?" "Of course," Lydia said, years of social training asserting themselves despite her inner turmoil. "Please come inside. I'll have some refreshments brought to the parlor." As she showed Julia into the house, Lydia's mind was racing. What could this woman want after all this time, and how would Heath react to seeing her again? The afternoon stretched interminably as Lydia tried to focus on her work while Julia waited in the parlor, leafing through magazines and occasionally making polite but distant conversation when Lydia checked on her. The woman revealed nothing about the purpose of her visit, maintaining a cool reserve that made Lydia increasingly uneasy. It was nearly 6 when Heath finally returned, his arrival announced by the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. Lydia met him at the door, her expression serious enough to immediately alert him that something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, removing his hat and gloves. "You have a visitor," Lydia said quietly. "Julia Harrington. She's been waiting in the parlor since early afternoon." Heath went very still, his face betraying nothing but a slight tightening around his eyes. "I see," he said after a moment. "Did she say why she's here?" "No, only that she needed to speak with you." Heath nodded once, his gaze meeting Lydia's. "Thank you for telling me. Would you join us, please?" "I'd prefer not to speak with her alone." The request surprised and touched Lydia. "Of course, if that's what you want." "It is," Heath confirmed, his hand briefly squeezing hers in reassurance before he straightened his shoulders and moved toward the parlor. Julia rose as they entered, her face lighting up at the sight of Heath. "Heath, darling," she said, stepping forward with her hands extended. "It's been far too long." Heath remained near the doorway, making no move to take her offered hands. "Julia," he acknowledged, his tone neutral. "This is unexpected." Julia's smile faltered slightly at his cool reception, but she recovered quickly. "I realize that, and I apologize for arriving without notice, but I had to see you." Her gaze flicked briefly to Lydia, standing just behind Heath. "Perhaps we could speak privately." "Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Mrs. Owens," Heath replied firmly. "She has my complete trust." Something in his tone must have conveyed the futility of arguing, because Julia merely nodded, resuming her seat while Heath and Lydia took chairs opposite her. "Very well," Julia said, smoothing her skirt with practiced grace. I'll be direct then. My marriage has ended, Heath. Frederick and I are divorced. I've come to see if perhaps we might reconsider what once was between us. Lydia felt as though a cold hand had gripped her heart. Of all the reasons for Julia's visit, this was the one she had feared most. Heath's expression remained impassive. "I'm sorry to hear about your divorce," he said evenly. "That must have been difficult. But if you've come here expecting to resume our previous relationship, I'm afraid you've had a wasted journey. That chapter of my life is closed." Julia leaned forward, her green eyes intent on Heath's face. "Is it truly? We were good together once, Heath. You loved me. And I made a terrible mistake in leaving you. I see that now. Frederick never understood me the way you did, never cherished me as you would have." "That's all in the past," Heath said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've moved on, Julia. My heart is engaged elsewhere now." Julia's gaze shifted to Lydia, comprehension dawning in her eyes. "I see," she said softly. "With your housekeeper. How unconventional." The slight emphasis on housekeeper carried a world of implied social judgment, but Heath merely smiled, reaching over to take Lydia's hand in full view of their visitor. "With a woman of intelligence, strength, and genuine kindness," he corrected. "Qualities I've come to value above all others." The pointed response was not lost on Julia, whose composed expression slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of genuine hurt. "I suppose I deserved that," she said after a moment. "But I had to try. I've been miserable without you, Heath." "I'm sorry for your unhappiness," Heath replied, not unkindly. "But returning to the past isn't the answer for either of us. You'll find your way forward, Julia. You always were resourceful." It was a dismissal, albeit a gentle one. Julia seemed to recognize it as such, rising gracefully from her seat. "Well, I won't impose on your hospitality any longer. I have a room reserved at the hotel in Pine Ridge." "You're welcome to stay for supper before you go," Lydia offered, her innate sense of courtesy overriding the jealousy she couldn't quite suppress. Julia looked at her with new interest, perhaps reassessing this woman who had won Heath's heart. "Thank you, but no. I think it's best that I leave now." She turned to Heath. "I wish you happiness, truly. She must be quite special to have captured what I foolishly threw away." "She is," Heath said simply. After Julia had gone, escorted to her waiting buckboard by Heath, a heavy silence fell over the house. Lydia busied herself setting the table for supper, her emotions in turmoil. Part of her was elated by Heath's unequivocal rejection of Julia's overtures and his public acknowledgement of his feelings for her. But another part couldn't help wondering if he had truly moved on from the beautiful, sophisticated woman who had once held his heart. Heath found her in the dining room, arranging flowers in a vase with more attention than the task required. He came to stand beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Lydia nodded, not trusting her voice immediately. Then, "She's very beautiful." "Yes," Heath agreed simply. "She always was. But beauty isn't what matters most to me, Lydia. It never has been." Lydia turned to face him, needing to ask the question that had been haunting her since Julia's arrival. "Did you love her very much?" Heath considered the question seriously before answering. "I thought I did at the time. But looking back, I think what I loved was the idea of her, what she represented. Sophistication, social standing, the kind of life I thought I wanted." He reached out to touch Lydia's cheek gently. "What I feel for you is entirely different, deeper, more real. You see me as I am, not as what I have or what I can provide." The sincerity in his eyes melted away Lydia's doubts. "I do see you, Heath Vance, the good and the not so good, and I love all of it." It was the first time either of them had spoken the word love so directly, and it hung in the air between them, vibrant with meaning. Heath's eyes darkened with emotion as he drew her into his arms. "And I love you, Lydia Owens, with everything that I am." Their kiss was a confirmation, a promise, a sealing of the truth they had just acknowledged. When they finally parted, Lydia felt as though something fundamental had shifted, cementing the bond between them in a way that could not be easily broken. "No more doubts?" Heath asked, his forehead resting against hers. "No more doubts," Lydia affirmed. Whatever the future held, whether Thomas returned or not, whether their legal strategy succeeded or failed, they would face it together, strengthened by the love they had found in the most unexpected of circumstances. July brought sweltering heat to the valley, making the ranch hands seek shade during the hottest part of the day, and sending many of the North Star's inhabitants to the lake for relief. It was during one such excursion, with half the ranch enjoying a Sunday afternoon swim, that the messenger arrived. Lydia was sitting on the shore, her feet dangling in the cool water, watching Heath teach Charlie's youngest grandson to swim when a rider approached from the direction of the main house. It was Dawson, one of the younger hands, looking unusually serious. "Mr. Vance," he called, dismounting quickly. "Telegraph came for you from Cheyenne. The operator said it was urgent, so I rode right out." Heath waded to shore, water streaming from his bare torso as he accepted the yellow paper from Dawson's hand. His expression grew increasingly grave as he read its contents. "What is it?" Lydia asked, concern rising within her as she approached. Heath looked up, his eyes finding hers. "It's from James, my lawyer friend in Cheyenne. Thomas Owens has been located." Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. "Where?" "Denver. He's in jail, awaiting trial for fraud and theft." Heath handed her the telegram. "Read it." The message was brief but clear. Thomas had been arrested in Denver after attempting to swindle a wealthy businessman. During questioning, he had mentioned his wife in Wyoming, apparently hoping for sympathy or perhaps assistance with bail. The authorities had contacted Heath's lawyer friend, who had been making inquiries about Thomas for months. "What does this mean for us?" Lydia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Heath's expression softened as he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It means we have an opportunity, Lydia. If Thomas is convicted, which seems likely, according to James, he'll face a significant prison sentence. Under the circumstances, he might be persuaded to agree to a divorce in exchange for some financial consideration." Hope blossomed in Lydia's heart. "Do you really think so?" "It's worth trying," Heath said, determination evident in his voice. "James suggests I come to Denver as soon as possible to discuss the matter with Thomas directly. I'll leave tomorrow." "I'm coming with you," Lydia said firmly. Heath looked as though he might object, then seemed to reconsider. "Are you sure? Seeing him again won't be easy." "I'm sure," Lydia replied, straightening her shoulders. "This concerns my future, our future. I need to be there." Heath's expression reflected both concern and pride. "All right, then. We'll leave at first light." The journey to Denver took 3 days by stagecoach, the fastest mode of travel available from Pine Ridge. Lydia spent much of the journey oscillating between anxiety about seeing Thomas again and hope that this unexpected development might lead to the resolution she and Heath had been seeking. Heath was a steady presence beside her, his hand often covering hers in silent support, his quiet conversations distracting her from her worries. By the time they reached Denver, Lydia felt as prepared as she could be for the confrontation ahead. James Hamilton, Heath's lawyer friend, met them at their hotel shortly after their arrival. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 40s, with intelligent eyes and a reassuring manner that immediately put Lydia at ease. "Mrs. Owens," he greeted her, bowing slightly. "It's a pleasure to meet you." though I wish it were under more pleasant circumstances." "Thank you for your assistance in this matter, Mr. Hamilton," Lydia replied. "I'm grateful for your efforts on our behalf." Once they were settled in the hotel's private dining room, James updated them on the situation. Thomas Owens was indeed in the Denver jail, charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and false representation. The evidence against him was substantial, and the trial was set to begin in 2 weeks. "I've arranged for you to meet with him tomorrow morning," James informed them. "The warden has agreed to allow a private conversation in the visitor's room. I should warn you, though, that Mr. Owens is not in the best of spirits. His attempts to secure bail have been unsuccessful, and he faces a significant prison sentence if convicted." "How significant?" Heath asked. 5 to 10 years, possibly more," James replied. "The businessman he attempted to defraud is influential, and he's pressing for the maximum penalty." Lydia tried to process this information. Thomas, the charming, handsome man she had married with such hope and expectation, was now a common criminal facing years in prison. Despite everything he had done to her, she couldn't help feeling a twinge of pity. "What's our strategy?" Heath asked, his practical nature asserting itself. "Direct negotiation," James said. "Offer him money enough to secure better legal representation and perhaps some comforts during his incarceration, in exchange for his cooperation with a divorce. Given his circumstances, it's an offer he would be foolish to refuse." That night, in the privacy of her hotel room, Lydia found sleep elusive. Tomorrow she would see Thomas for the first time since he had abandoned her to Jeremiah Quinn's mercy. What would she say to him? What would he say to her? And would he agree to set her free? Morning came too quickly, bringing with it the reality of the confrontation ahead. Heath was waiting for her in the hotel lobby, his expression concerned as he noted her pale face and the shadows beneath her eyes. "We don't have to do this today," he said gently. "It can wait." "No," Lydia replied, drawing strength from his presence. "I want this resolved." The Denver jail was a forbidding stone building in the heart of the city. Inside, the air was stale and tinged with the unmistakable odors of unwashed bodies, disinfectant, and despair. Lydia tried not to flinch as they were led through iron-barred doors to the visitor's room, a sparse space containing a wooden table and chairs. "Wait here," the guard instructed. "I'll bring Owens." Heath moved to stand beside Lydia, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. "Remember, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. James and I can handle the negotiation." Lydia nodded, grateful for his understanding but determined to face this challenge with dignity. "Thank you, but I need to do this myself, for my own peace of mind." The door opened, and Thomas Owens was led in, his wrists shackled. Lydia's first thought was how diminished he looked, his once handsome face haggard, his previously immaculate appearance now reduced to prison garb and unkempt hair. When he saw Lydia, his eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with calculation. "Well, well," he drawled, taking the seat indicated by the guard. "My dear wife, come to visit her unfortunate husband in his hour of need. How touching." His voice was the same smooth, with that undercurrent of mockery that had once cut Lydia to the quick. But she found, somewhat to her surprise, that it no longer had the power to wound her. "Hello, Thomas," she said evenly. "It's been some time." Thomas's gaze shifted to Heath, sizing him up with the practiced eye of a gambler assessing an opponent. "And who's your friend? Your new protector, perhaps? You always did need someone to take care of you, Lydia." Heath's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing Lydia to lead the conversation as they had agreed. "This is Heath Vance," Lydia said calmly, "and Mr. Hamilton, an attorney. We've come to discuss our situation, Thomas." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his shackles clanking against the table. Our situation? You mean the fact that you're my wife, yet you're clearly involved with this gentleman? He gestured toward Heath with a smirk. Tusk, Lydia. What would your sainted parents say? They would say that a man who sells his wife to pay gambling debts has forfeited any right to call himself a husband, Lydia replied, her voice cold. They would say that a woman left to such a fate is entitled to seek happiness elsewhere. Thomas's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine shame before his mask of cynical amusement slipped back into place. Ah, yes, that unfortunate business with Quinn. I did intend to come back for you, once I'd made some money. By swindling innocent people. Lydia asked, unable to keep the disdain from her voice. By living as a criminal. Is that what you've become, Thomas? For a brief moment the facade cracked, revealing the desperate man beneath. What choice did I have? I was ruined in Sheridan, hunted by creditors elsewhere. A man does what he must to survive. As does a woman, Lydia replied, thinking of how she had rebuilt her life at the North Star. Which brings us to the purpose of our visit. We want to discuss divorce. Thomas's eyebrows rose. Divorce? Now, why would I agree to that? You're still my wife, Lydia, for better or worse. And right now, I could use a loyal wife to speak on my behalf at the trial, to testify to my character. That won't be happening, Lydia said firmly. But we're prepared to offer you something that might be of more practical value in your current situation. James Hamilton stepped forward, opening his briefcase and removing a document. Mr. Owens, my clients are prepared to offer you the sum of $500 in exchange for your signature on this divorce petition. The money would be available immediately upon your signature and could be used for whatever purpose you deem necessary, perhaps better legal representation for your upcoming trial. Thomas's eyes glittered with interest at the mention of money, though he tried to appear indifferent. $500. That's a paltry sum for a man's wife. It's the exact amount Heath paid to free me from the auction block where you left me, Lydia pointed out, her voice steady despite the painful memory. It seems a fitting symmetry. Thomas had the grace to wince at that, his gaze dropping to the table for a moment before he regained his composure. Perhaps, but my current predicament requires more substantial assistance. Make it $1,000 and I'll consider it. Heath spoke for the first time, his voice level but with an underlying steel that Lydia had rarely heard. The offer is $500. Owens, take it or leave it. But consider this. Without our help, you face your trial with an overworked public defender and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence. With $500, you might secure better representation and improve your chances significantly. Thomas studied Heath, seeming to reassess the man before him. You seem very eager to have my wife, Mr. Vance. I wonder why that is. Could it be love? He uttered the last word with a sneer, as if the concept was beneath contempt. Yes, Heath replied simply, his gaze never wavering. It is. The straightforward admission seemed to catch Thomas off guard. He looked from Heath to Lydia, noting the way they stood together, the subtle signs of their connection. Well, he said finally, something almost like genuine emotion crossing his face. That's more than I ever gave you, isn't it, Lydia? Yes, she agreed quietly. It is. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table as he considered his options. Then, with a decisive nod, he reached for the document James had placed before him. Give me a pen, he said. $500 it is. Consider it my wedding gift to you both. As Thomas signed the divorce petition, Lydia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a burden she hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. This chapter of her life was finally closing, making way for a new beginning outside the jail in the bright Denver sunshine. Heath turned to Lydia, his expression concerned. "Are you all right? That couldn't have been easy." Lydia took a deep breath, surprising herself with the lightness she felt. "Actually, I'm better than I expected. Seeing Thomas again made me realize something important." "What's that?" "That I'm truly free of him, not just legally now, but emotionally as well. He has no power over me anymore." She looked up at Heath, her heart full of love for this man who had given her so much more than just her freedom. "And I have you to thank for that." Heath's smile was tender as he took her hand. "You did the hard work yourself, Lydia. I just provided the opportunity." "Nevertheless," Lydia insisted, "without you I might still be in Sheridan or worse. You changed my life, Heath Vance." "And you changed mine," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than you know." James Hamilton cleared his throat discreetly. "I'll file the petition immediately," he informed them. "Given the circumstances and Mr. Owens's cooperation, the divorce should be granted expeditiously. I would estimate within a month, perhaps sooner." "Thank you, James," Heath said, shaking his friend's hand warmly, "for everything." As James departed to attend to the legal formalities, Heath turned back to Lydia, his expression suddenly nervous in a way she had never seen before. "Lydia," he began, taking both her hands in his. "I had planned to do this differently, somewhere more romantic than a Denver street outside the jail. But I find I can't wait any longer." Lydia's heart began to race as Heath dropped to one knee before her, right there on the busy sidewalk, oblivious to the curious stares of passers-by. "Lydia Owens," he said, looking up at her with all the love in his heart shining in his eyes. "From the moment I saw you in that town square, something in me recognized you as the woman I had been waiting for all my life. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy filled Lydia's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Heath Vance, I will marry you." Heath rose and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. Around them, several onlookers broke into spontaneous applause, causing Lydia to blush and Heath to laugh with pure happiness. "We should celebrate," he declared, tucking her arm through his as they began walking back toward their hotel. "Dinner at the finest restaurant in Denver tonight. And tomorrow, we'll find you a ring worthy of the most beautiful woman in the Colorado Territory." Lydia squeezed his arm, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "All I need is you," she said truthfully. "Everything else is just details." Heath's answering smile was radiant. "Well, future Mrs. Vance, I intend to get those details right, starting with making you the happiest bride the North Star has ever seen." As they walked through the bustling streets of Denver, making plans for their future together, Lydia couldn't help marveling at the strange and wonderful path that had led her here. From the darkest moment of her life, being sold like property in a dusty town square, had come the greatest happiness she had ever known. It was as if the universe had been working all along to bring her and Heath together, transforming tragedy into triumph, despair into joy. And now, with the legal barriers to their union falling away, they could begin the next chapter of their story not as master and servant, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equal partners in love and life. The North Star would be their home, their sanctuary, the place where they would build a future and, perhaps someday, a family of their own. As if reading her thoughts, Heath paused, drawing her close for another kiss, right in the middle of the crowded street. "I love you, Lydia," he whispered against her lips, "now and always." "And I love you," she replied, certain that no woman had ever spoken truer words, "now and always." The autumn of 1878 painted the North Star Valley in brilliant hues of gold, crimson, and amber, as the aspen trees turned, and the meadows took on the tawny colors of the changing season. It was against this spectacular backdrop that Heath Vance and Lydia Owens were married on a crisp October afternoon, with the Bighorn Mountains standing sentinel in the distance. The ceremony took place on the ranch, beneath an arch of autumn flowers and branches that the women of the North Star had lovingly constructed. Guests from neighboring ranches and the town of Pine Ridge filled the rows of chairs set up on the lawn, while ranch hands in their Sunday best stood respectfully at the back. Martha Wilson had transformed the main house and grounds into a celebration worthy of the occasion, with lanterns strung between trees, tables laden with food, and a dance floor constructed specially for the event. Even old Jeb Miller had returned for the wedding, his leg now fully healed, declaring he wouldn't miss it for all the gold in Colorado. Lydia wore a gown of ivory satin and lace, ordered from Denver and altered to fit her slender frame perfectly. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with tiny white rosebuds and a lace veil that had belonged to Martha's daughter. In her hands, she carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers gathered from the meadow near the lake, their special place. As she walked toward Heath, who waited for her beneath the flower-decked arch with the minister from Pine Ridge, Lydia felt a surging joy that brought tears to her eyes. This man, this good, honorable, loving man, was to be her husband. After all they had endured, all the obstacles they had overcome, this moment felt nothing short of miraculous. Heath watched her approach with undisguised adoration, his blue eyes never leaving hers, his smile growing wider with each step she took. He had never looked more handsome than he did in his new black suit, white shirt, and brocade vest, his brown hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. When she reached him, he took her hands in his thumbs brushing gently over her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. The minister began the service, but Lydia barely heard the words, lost as she was in the depth of emotion she saw in Heath's eyes. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken with voices that trembled slightly with the weight of their meaning. When Heath slipped the gold band onto Lydia's finger, his hand was steady, his eyes full of promise. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "You may kiss your bride." Heath's kiss was tender yet passionate, a perfect reflection of the man himself. As their lips met, sealing their union, the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening with feasting, dancing, and toasts to the happy couple. Charlie Wilson, who had become like a father to Lydia in the month she had been at the North Star, gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes, speaking of second chances and the healing power of love. As twilight deepened into night, lanterns and bonfires illuminated the festivities. Heath and Lydia danced beneath the stars, their movements in perfect harmony, their faces glowing with happiness. "Happy Mrs. Vance," Heath murmured as they swayed to the music provided by a fiddle player from town. "Blissfully so, Mr. Vance," Lydia replied, nestling closer in his arms. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "This is just the beginning," Heath promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We have a lifetime of happiness ahead of us." Later, as the celebration continued around them, Heath led Lydia away from the crowd, toward the path that led to the lake. They walked in companionable silence, hand in hand, until they reached the shore where they had first begun to know each other. The full moon cast a silver path across the water, and the night was alive with the sounds of autumn, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. "I wanted a moment alone with you," Heath explained, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they gazed out at the moonlit scene. "To remember where we started and to dream about where we're going." Lydia leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid strength of him. "And where are we going, husband mine?" "Wherever life takes us," Heath replied, his breath warm against her ear. "Together. That's the only thing that matters to me, that we face whatever comes as one." Lydia turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the beloved features that had become as familiar to her as her own. "I love you, Heath Vance, more than I have words to express." "Show me," he whispered, his voice deepening with desire as he lowered his mouth to hers. Their kiss beneath the harvest moon was a promise, a celebration, a beginning. And as Heath swept her into his arms to carry her back to the house that was now truly their home, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged, not just a place, but a person, a heart that beat in perfect time with her own. The years that followed brought changes to the North Star. The ranch prospered under Heath and Lydia's joint stewardship, expanding its operations and building a reputation for the finest cattle in the territory. The main house, once so clearly a bachelor's domain, was transformed by Lydia's touch into a true family home, warm, welcoming, and filled with laughter. In the spring of 1880, their joy was multiplied with the birth of their first child, a son they named James, after the lawyer friend who had helped secure their happiness. 2 years later came a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Lydia's mother. Both children inherited their father's blue eyes and their mother's quick intelligence, growing strong and happy in the freedom of ranch life. Lydia's role at the North Star evolved as well. No longer merely Heath's wife and the mother of his children, she became known throughout the region for her business acumen and her advocacy for education. When Pine Ridge decided to build a proper schoolhouse, it was Lydia who led the fundraising efforts and helped select the first teacher. Heath, watching his wife flourish, often marveled at how different their life might have been if he hadn't stopped in Sheridan that fateful day, if he hadn't arrived at the town square just as the auction was beginning. So much of their happiness had hinged on a series of coincidences, or perhaps, as Lydia preferred to believe, on Providence. They never forgot the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Each year, on the anniversary of the day Heath had torn up Lydia's bill of sale, they would ride together to their special spot by the lake, bringing a picnic and spending the day in private celebration of their beginning. It was during one such anniversary, 5 years into their marriage, that Heath presented Lydia with a special gift, a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed in gold on the cover. "For your story," he explained as she ran her fingers over the fine leather. "Our story. So that James and Elizabeth will know, when they're old enough, how their parents found each other." Lydia opened the journal, finding the first page already inscribed with Heath's strong, clear handwriting. "In the spring of 1878, in a dusty town square in Sheridan, Wyoming, I found the woman who would become my heart's companion, my truest friend, and the love of my life. This is our story." Tears filled Lydia's eyes as she read the words. "It's perfect," she whispered, leaning across their picnic blanket to kiss him. "Thank you." "I thought you might begin by writing about that day," Heath suggested, stroking her cheek tenderly. "About how brave you were, standing there with your head held high despite everything." Lydia smiled, remembering. "And you, looking so stern and formidable in your hat and duster, I thought you were much older than you were." "And I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen," Heath replied softly. "I still do." They sat together by the lake as the afternoon waned, talking and laughing, recalling the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. Around them, the North Star stretched in all directions, a kingdom of grass and sky that was their legacy to their children. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Heath helped Lydia to her feet, gathering their picnic things for the ride home. But before they mounted their horses, he pulled her close one more time, his expression suddenly serious. "You ever regret it?" he asked, a rare moment of vulnerability in his voice. "Marrying a rancher, living so far from the cultural refinements you grew up with." Lydia looked up at him, this man who had rescued her from degradation, who had offered her freedom and then his heart, who had given her a home and a family and a purpose. The answer was as clear and certain as the love in her eyes. "Not for a single moment," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "You bought my freedom, Heath Vance, but you gave me so much more. You gave me a life worth living, a love worth cherishing, and a happiness beyond anything I could have imagined. How could I possibly regret that?" Heath's smile as he lifted her onto her horse was as bright as the day they had married, his love for her undimmed by the passing years. "Race you home, Mrs. Vance," he challenged, swinging into his own saddle. "Last one there has to explain to Martha why we're late for supper again." Lydia laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like music. "You're on, Mr. Vance." Side by side they galloped toward home, toward the lights of the North Star already twinkling in the gathering dusk, toward their children waiting on the porch, toward the future they had built together from the ashes of despair. And as they rode, Lydia thought of the journal waiting in her saddlebag, and the story it would contain, a story of darkness and light, of loss and finding, of a love that had transformed two lives and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering. It was their story, and it had only just begun.